I think we're going to get started. I may get Gerry off the phone. He's buying another soccer club as we speak. Closed. Welcome everybody. Welcome back in. As a sponsor, I guess I get the top panel here today, and it's my pleasure to welcome Gerry Cardinale, founder of RedBird Capital, Ian Charles, co-founder of Arctos, and Behdad Eghbali, co-founder of Clearlake Capital. And I thought maybe we'd use just one microphone, but I didn't want to see anybody wrestling with Ian over the next 20 minutes. And so to keep everyone safe and all limbs attached, I think we've got 4 here now. I know this is going to be a lively panel, and I'm hoping this is the last you guys will hear of me, because I want to hear you guys debate some stuff. So when it comes to U.S. investment, I know all 3 of you guys are primarily drawn to the big 4 U.S. leagues that currently permit private equity investment in this country. So that would be MLS, the NBA, the NHL, and Major League Baseball. But in Europe, it's a whole different ballgame. It's been open to private equity and institutional investment forever. And there seems to be a lot of opportunities. So whether you're buying AC Milan like Gerry recently did, or Chelsea with Behdad, or investing across Europe like Ian, or even Wrexham like Ryan Reynolds, there's a lot to look at. So let me throw out to the group, whoever wants to pick this one up. How do you curate all the opportunities that are coming your way, and what are you primarily focused on when you're looking at a European investment?
Yeah, look, I'd say for us, the stuff we've done in Europe takes different incarnations, sort of derivatively Liverpool through Fenway Sports Group, Toulouse, which was its own, sort of experiment that we did very successfully, and then now AC Milan. But they all carry the same attributes where we can, buy relatively well, but then really own well. And that either comes from buying into an existing team and ownership group like Fenway, that I think is one of the best out there, and then bring what we can bring to take that to the next level in partnership with them. Toulouse, which got relegated, and then, after the first year, we got to promote it again, and doing the kind of things that we can do for a team like that. And then AC Milan, which, I think AC Milan, and I've been on the record on this, I think AC Milan is a really interesting sort of hybrid in between those two, where that really should be a sleeping giant that we can really bring some value to, both on the field and off the field. And, being able to do both of those things is really important to us. The challenge for guys from this side of the pond working over there is that I think you got to embrace the fact that, buying into European football is a public-private partnership. And that's different than investing in teams over here. So you have to factor that component into it. And, we're still figuring that out, but we embrace that wholeheartedly. And that can be part of the upside if you do it right.
So let's before we get into the multi-club model, which I do want to talk about, and I think folks would like to hear about. Let's talk a little bit about the team itself as an asset. So you've got the team, you've got what happens on the pitch, but I've heard Gerry describe these assets, which used to be owned by, primarily high net worth individuals or families, as mini Disneys. And Ian, I've heard you interviewed and debated with Doc, actually, whether these are platform investments or not, and if so, what's the key component of the platform? Behdad, you're referring to Chelsea as a beachhead, both for growing the portfolio of assets, but really for helping to commercialize that asset. Can one of you guys pick up on this idea of Disney or a platform or a beachhead, and what you guys are hoping to achieve there?
Look, I mean, my point on the Disney analogy is really aspirationally what these should be, right? And to Behdad's point, they are under-optimized. But, one of the challenges for sports globally is I don't think anyone, incumbents or new entrants, have figured out how to monetize the live event. And it's actually really hard to monetize the live event, right? It's hard to scale it. One of the reasons you look at, multi-club, platforms is obviously there's the benefits and the synergies on the player side, but there's also, if you do it right and you create the right infrastructure, you can amortize that across multiple different IP platforms, if you will. At the end of the day, it's just intellectual property monetization. And so I don't get emotionally attached to, as a fan of these things, I try not to get emotionally attached. I look at them and I say, one of the things that all of us should take note of is, this concept that these things are bought on a multiple of revenue is a joke, right? I mean, that's a shame. Why is that? Right? You're a cash flow guy. I know that, right? You guys are. And so they should be cash flow properties. Well, there's a virtual circle there where, you've got at the end of the day, in Europe, the public-private partnership demands that you deliver for your public partner, which is the fans, and all they care about is winning. That model, with no salary cap and relegation in the transfer market, has led to a phenomenon where everyone's deficit financing this and is an arms race for players. Well, that's sort of divergent and counter to cash flow generation. I think we can accomplish both, and I think there can be a new form of ownership that monetizes intellectual property in the form of a Disney-type mentality where you've got the 360-degree flywheel of monetizing that hub and spoke and holistic, and that cash flow generation, if you do it right, can go back into a very smart way of putting a value proposition on the field.
How do you look differently when you're looking at Europe? So we don't have collective bargaining in Europe. We do have a fixed number of teams, thankfully, so we still have scarcity value. They don't all share in a lot of league revenues. And you have fan bases that, as passionate as U.S. fans may be, many of them pale in comparison to some of the European clubs. So how do you look at that, and how do you account for those risks?
Look, I'd say each of these markets geographically in Europe are their own ecosystems, and I think guys like us can do our job in those ecosystems specific to the parameters of those ecosystems, regardless of whether it's England or the continent, as an example. Having said that, one of the things that I'm increasingly interested in is this growing divergence between the English Premier League and the rest of the leagues on the continent. And over there, it's in the old days over here, everyone talked about media, and media was the silver bullet that was going to drive value for all of these teams. And the world over here, I think the business is just, the business is the pace. The business over here in sports is the pace car for the rest of the world, and so it's advanced way beyond just that facile notion that media is going to be your silver bullet to buy down your overpayment getting one of these teams. Over there, it's still really media. And media, they haven't figured out how to monetize the live event. A lot of the infrastructure needs to be redeveloped. All the stuff that we take for granted over here gives you a pathway to work your way into the money on an overbuy or a full value payment in becoming a rights holder. But the thing that interests me as someone who just put a lot of money into Serie A with AC Milan is that disparity, which is really driven by media. It's a 3-to-1 disparity between the English Premier League and Serie A, right? And it's 2-to-1 between La Liga and Serie A. Why is that, right? And it's you and I were talking about that in the games that we had together, and it's that there's a huge opportunity there. And I think, by the way, there's also a huge opportunity. As a relatively new entrant to European football, I, for the life of me, can't understand how you can have the world's most popular sport and not have the world's biggest economy in that sport, in the global system. So this MLS thing, come on. I mean, we should be figuring out how to get the Americans into the world system, but you're not going to do that. The guys that are in the world system, they don't want someone like America coming into that. So when you start looking at these kind of major structural changes that guys like us could be positive catalysts for and as responsible participants, that's really interesting to me. At some point you run out of things to do here, right? So maybe one of the things, we can set our eyes on, I think it's safe to say we could, each one of us can probably do our job in a specific asset. What's really interesting is if we can, as we're doing our job in a specific asset, can we be catalysts for that kind of structural change at that level, which is really very Darwinian, and it's what needs to happen.
One interesting data point, right? So cumulative market cap, use Forbes value of NFL teams, probably 150 billion, 155 billion. Add the Premier League, La Liga, France, Italy, Serie A, I think you're 30 billion, 35 billion fan bases of maybe 3-4 billion globally compared to 200 million, and that's being generous to the NFL of a fan. So it's talk about a league and a sport that's optimized. Clearly, you're not every sub's created equal, but 4 billion fan base on a cumulative market cap of 30 billion, maybe a little more, but zip code, and cumulative media revenue, Gerry, of 5-6 billion maybe against 20 for the NFL.
Right.
On 20 times the fan base globally.
Right.
Tremendous upside. Tremendous.
Well, but a tremendous upside, but you can't, you have to be, you can't just buy into a league and just sit there. I mean, the challenge is, to do this kind of stuff, you gotta shake it up a bit. But I'm telling you, over there, you got to be responsible about how you do that. We cannot go in guns blazing as Americans, just applying the same mentality. Over there, it's different. And so I'm watching that and trying to figure out, how we do that. But there is no doubt that would be a very positive contribution that we can make to that ecosystem in a responsible way.
Americans have gone in gun blazing and learned their lessons, I think, in England, certainly in Italy. And you chose to invest in Italy, even recognizing the disparity between the Premier League and Serie A. I assume you're viewing that primarily as a lot of work, but a lot of upside if you do it right.
Yeah, as I said, look, within each of these ecosystems, we're in the English Premier League, we're in League One, we're in Serie A. They're all, at a macro level, it's the same things. It's the same ingredients, the same parameters. We kind of know how to do it. But then, there are nuances specific to each of those. Serie A, look, I mean, just take the fact that we didn't underwrite this in our underwriting case, but there hasn't been a new stadium in Italy since 2011, right? And that was a 40,000-seat stadium in Turin, right? And so, if you're Michael Rapino and you want to go take these global acts to Europe and you could look at Italy, you really don't have anywhere to go. Now, as I think we've seen, there's a great partnership between music and sports, right? And again, it comes back to, if you look at these things, going back to the analogy of my point about mini Disneys, these are live event entertainment companies, right? And so, yes, we have a job to do, which is to put to provide a value proposition to the fans who are our implicit partners in these markets, which means we got to win. One of the things I've learned over here in the States, being affiliated and involved with the Yankees and the Red Sox and the other things that we've done, is everyone thinks you have to win a World Series or a Super Bowl every year, right? And I don't think that's the case. I think the value proposition, that's the beauty of sports. That's why sports attracts what it attracts, because you're not necessarily, the Dodgers are out right now, right? 111 win season. That's the beauty of sports. What you have to do is put a compelling product on the field consistently every year. Right, so with the Serie A opportunity, with the AC Milan opportunity, they won the Scudetto last year. The expectation is we got to do our job to make sure they win it again. But then there's Champions League, and then there's narrowing the gap between Serie A and the EPL. So there's so many different levels, and then that's before you even get to the infrastructure and bringing a new stadium to Italy, et cetera.
So your partner, Behdad, Todd Bowley, spoke about building a multi-club model. And I'm curious what you guys are thinking. All three of you are invested into multi-club models in various asset classes. So tell us a bit more about your thoughts there and why you think there are some synergies in that approach.
Yeah, I think three different reasons for it. I think one, if done well, you could make money on each specific enterprise. I think what Gerry's done, Blitz, Ian, you guys have done, you bought well, you're going to make money on this specific investment. Two, if done right, if you use data, if you're thoughtful about this global market for talent and access to talent, that's not effectively done through a draft, an NFL draft or an NBA draft, or the extensive college or baseball farm system, which I would attribute as a multi-club effectively model. You can actually capture, acquire, retain, sign talent, and monetize talent. So I think there's a talent arbitrage opportunity that exists. And three, for an AC Milan or Chelsea, it's the perfect pathway, right, of developing talent, whereby you don't have to spend crazy money on payroll. There's teams in the Premier League that spend 10% of what the top 5, 6 teams spend on payroll. We hired a coach away from Brighton. We think they're one of the best run teams in the Premier League. Founder owner is a sports gaming data background. He spends 10% of the payroll, wins almost as much, right, and is a very stable mid-market, mid-table, very profitable club, right? So I think if you apply some of that IP into developing talent, but keeping your talent, again, not subject to arbitration, certainly subject to free agency, but the model of 6, 7, 8-year contracts earlier based on players you've retained who have market value, we think can be a sustainable model. And again, I think we're probably in the third inning of teams, leagues. All of us and others are looking at different markets, making bets in different markets. For us, Portugal's an interesting market, obviously gateway to South America, gateway to European visas. French market's interesting, given quality of the league, given frankly quality of French speakers in Africa, right? Africa we think is a big market. The Dodgers, you mentioned Todd, if they have an academy, they have a farm team in Uganda, right? So I think looking at Africa as a market with just an untapped amount of talent, close to Europe, time zone wise, close to Europe, we think is interesting. And again, I think we're all kind of teetering at the surface of where this is going to go. Clearly, I think our approach was it so happened so because of a global conflict, Chelsea was available, and I think we thought we'd start with that. But I think what you've done with Blitz is not start with the large market club, and frankly build a nice network of clubs that have cohesion and to have some symmetry. Where we've seen it not work is when people are buying clubs randomly, largely because it's there and it's for sale. And by the way, even those guys have made money on it. Folks who've done that, But again, I think we're in the early days of it. Gerry, what have you? Obviously, you've had good investments across 2, 3 different markets, different places. What's your observation there?
Well, like as you do that, like the people coming in just sort of targeted that aren't starting second, third, just targeted. Like I kind of feel like a lot of those guys are gonna get smoked. Like it's been a good run, but like I mean, how?
Look, I mean, it's as I said, the approach is the same across all the assets. So there's an element where if you put the effort into a data analytics capability and a stadium renovation or infrastructure capability, and the marketing and the sponsorship, our style has always been to up to getting into rights, actual team ownership. Our style was always to partner with teams and leagues and build businesses with them, where they contribute rights on a long-term basis. We contribute the capital and the operating capability, and we build a Yes or an On Location or a Legends and things like that. That model we can do over here on a multi-club basis and cut out all the middlemen. I mean, I've always been of the view, and again, going back to these are great pieces of intellectual property. They should own the monetization of the intellectual property on a vertically integrated basis. Why are you outsourcing ownership of your customer, in this case the fans, to all these other things? We can create it ourselves, and that's what we've done in the past. And I think the multi-club thing is interesting because we can do that for multi-clubs. And by the way, you get the strategic benefit that in terms of player development and the things that you've talked about, there's a synergy there where you can actually commingle player development into the things that you're doing on the field. So it's somewhat theoretical, but I think there really is an industrial logic to that kind of a collaboration and the commingling across management and across ownership and across player development.
Private equity comes into investments obviously looking to exit for a profit for the fund investors. And investing in teams, A, it's typically a longer term proposition, but B, you're stewards for a community. You have an obligation that each of you guys has spoken about to your fan base and to putting a good quality product on the pitch. How do you guys, Behdad or Gerry, how do you guys look at exit strategies with respect to team ownership?
Yeah, look, I mean, look at AC Milan. I mean, you know, Elliott did a very good job in the 4 years that they were the control owner in getting it to a point where they could hand the baton to us. I made the decision that I thought there was a virtue and continuity and that have kept them involved in some form. There's an ability to monetize and still stay involved. There's an ability, if you subscribe to my cash flow notion, there's an ability to, you know, repatriate your capital and get a return without necessarily selling it. Or you can, you know, given the supply-demand imbalance and the scarcity value around all of these assets, it's very easy to turn around and just sell it. You know, you have a responsibility to, as you said, implicit in your question, you have a responsibility to, if you are going to do that and take it as a more traditional private equity play, you have a responsibility to make sure you hand it off in the right way, right? You got to stay true to that. But I don't really worry about exit because I know if we do our job, the exit will be there in some form. So I don't invest really with a view towards thinking about how I'm going to get out. I think if we do our job, multiple opportunities will arise. And look, I think one of the things we're seeing, and the reason why guys like us are getting involved in European football, is there are no ownership restrictions. You know, it's very difficult for us to sort of play in the kind of ways that I like to play in the States as much. Over there, there's none of that restrictions, but that comes with other
Referring to debt restrictions and other restrictions in the U.S. leagues.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you really need to be a billionaire to buy an NFL team. You know, what's interesting about the M&A market for sports teams in America is when, you know, I don't think any of those auctions that you've seen across these various leagues have really been that robust. There's a reason for that, right? It's the ownership rules, and that's, you know, and that's okay. I mean, this is a very sophisticated, evolved market where that's okay. One of the things that's going to impose itself on this continued linear trajectory in these asset valuations in America is that the Silicon Valley guys don't really, for the most part, don't really have a burning desire to own sports teams, right? You have pockets of it, but you know, if our version of the oligarchs really had an interest in owning these sports teams, I could say you could underwrite that continued linear trajectory. You don't have that, and then you have the ownership rules on top of it. Over in Europe, you know, it's very different. It's much more egalitarian and it's a much more free market. But that comes with, you know, you take that and you take relegation in the transfer market, and it's no wonder that you have the kind of ownership that, you know, that you've been seeing with sovereigns or with, you know, individuals that are immensely wealthy. Question now is, can, you know, guys like us play in that pond and bring our experience and a level of professionalization that enhances that whole ecosystem? That's ultimately the macro play.
So I would say, let me start with your second question. So we think, you know, frankly, winning a good product on the field, on the pitch, and commercial success go you know, hand in hand, right? You have to have a good product to generate the sponsors, the content, for the content to work, right? Michael Jordan, you know, the ESPN special worked because Michael Jordan won, right? Ultimately, yeah. Luke Longley didn't have a, you know, special during COVID, right? It's just the way it is. She's a great player, but he didn't. So I think you got to win, right? And I think winning on the pitch, winning on the field just makes you know, you could do it efficiently, right, as opposed to not, but you have to do that to have commercial success, to have profitability.
You want to make sure that I can't go back to Italy.
Thank you for excluding me from that.
Look, I think the point, Dave, is which you know is that there was a reason for that. The structural imbalance of what I pointed out before between England and the continent is real, and that needs to be addressed. Whether that's the right way to address it or not, I don't know. I could see something happening in the continent together, which I think could be theoretically interesting. But you know, this is a very contentious and hotly debated topic. I don't pretend to have any views on that. You know, my job is to keep my head down and not get involved in that level of politics. But it's instructive to acknowledge the reasons why that happened and what are we going to do about it. We can hit that in different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be through that permutation.
Yeah, I think the sport needs more high-quality, premium matches and content. I think it doesn't have to be a super league. I think, you know, again, Todd went there on an all-star game, right? I think baseball all-star game, talent competition, draft generates $200-300 million of revenue on a Monday, Tuesday. Here, none of that exists. Could you see a, you know, EPL versus Serie A All-Star game, could you see a preseason match that we do that just puts more premium content on the pitch? I think you could. Structurally, are you going to, given how botched that effort was to create something else, does anyone have any appetite for anything that sounds like that? I think, a couple of teams in Spain do, and they're vocal about it, and I think everyone else doesn't want to go there, per se.
Look, I mean, I think the leagues are not immune from the evolution that guys like us focus on with the teams. And so I think, there's a huge opportunity with the leagues to evolve them as well. Parking capital in the leagues, I don't know that's not going to be a catalyst for evolving it. But the challenge for the leagues is that the individual teams have become so valuable that it's almost like it's gotten away from the leagues, right? And I think there needs to be people need to step back at the league level, and if you think that these teams are mini Disneys, look at the leagues and say, well, what are they? What's the relationship between the leagues and the teams? And I think the guys in the States, they've done a pretty good job with that, right? But I would say in general, globally, the teams have gotten away from the leagues. But I do think, the Super League question that you've asked does point out that there are things at the macro level that guys like us should be focusing on, and we can be helpful if we can engage with the leagues and look at them like companies as well. That doesn't happen, because when you get to the league level, it tends to all be about politics. But I think there's a missed opportunity there.